Hello, my name is Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the Illinois Principals Association. Thank you for joining me for this IPA talk. And it's a pleasure to have with me Colleen Burns, who is with the Commission to End Hunger. And we're going to just talk a little bit about the important topic of how we make sure our kids are fed, right? And true understanding of how that's obviously critically important as we think about, what we need to do to make sure our kids are well and also have what they need to perform at a high level too. So Colleen, thanks for joining me for this IPA talk. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. So Colleen, before we started the recording, you were sharing with me, your interesting background and a little bit how you came into the position that you're in right now. And so, you had to get me up to speed because when I was looking at your signature, it's got you connected to the Greater Chicago Food Depository. But you also are connected with the Department of Human Services, if I remember that correctly from what you were describing there. So I think before we get into talking about the commission and the commission's work, just share with us a little bit about your background and the work that you're doing right now.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Yes, I lead the work of the Illinois Commission on Hunger. It's a public-private partnership, which is composed of stakeholders from all over our state. And I am embedded at the Greater Chicago Food Depository. The CEO of the Greater Chicago Food Depository serves as the co-chair of the Commission to End Hunger. And then I technically belong also, as you mentioned, to the Department of Human Services. So essentially, I am the bridge between the public sector and the private sector, and making sure that the public sector and the private and nonprofit sector that we can leverage our collective power, so to speak, to make good on our mission to end hunger.
So speaking as an agent in an organization at IPA here who works closely with a state agency and our Illinois State Board of Education, obviously those partnerships are pretty important, at least, from our perspective here. We think they're pretty critical in terms of achieving our various missions. So would you share that as well?
Sure. Yeah. So the really the crux of what I do is I help our state agencies implement our federal nutrition programs. Mm-hmm. So essentially the state is responsible for administering those federal nutrition programs. And what are the ways that we can continue to innovate around service delivery to make improvements to the way that individuals in our state access public benefits? In my case, that really is largely around SNAP, WIC, and school meals.
Okay. So with the commission, how long has the commission been around now, Colleen?
Since 2010.
Okay. All right. So what are you really focused in on right now related to those programs and your work overall?
Well, so importantly, in 2020, the Pritzker administration sat new members to the commission, and just, the whole world changed, including the way that we were looking at combating hunger and food insecurity in our state. And so we did some statewide listening sessions.
Are you talking about a pandemic around 2020? Is that what you're driving at there? Yeah.
Yeah. Food insecurity, we've been making some pretty good progress on food insecurity before the pandemic. And then everything really changed. And we wanted to hear directly from communities about how the pandemic was impacting them and what were some of the solutions. And so we released a report in 2021. It's called From Food Insecurity to Food Equity, a Roadmap for Ending Hunger in Illinois. And that report laid out a multi-year plan to reduce food insecurity in Illinois and advance food equity for the long term. So we focus really on 3 strategies: leveraging technology, harnessing innovation, and supporting collaboration. And really the crux of that is to reduce barriers to program access and increasing uptake of nutrition assistance programs. So
when you talked about being able to make some great gains with regards to food insecurity, obviously, so that there's less food insecurity, were these strategies what it was allowing for that to happen, or were there some other things that were going on even pre-pandemic?
Yeah, what I would say is that our federal nutrition programs are the front line of defense against hunger in our country. So they're very flexible. So the pandemic really showed us that when the need increased so drastically, our federal nutrition programs were there to meet that increase in need. And, our federal nutrition programs provide nutritional support from infancy. So I mentioned the WIC program,
Yeah.
which supports pregnant parents and then postpartum and children all the way up to age 5. But, unfortunately, many people who need food assistance do not utilize the programs that are available to them. Some may not be aware that they're eligible or know how to sign up. Others face barriers to enrollment, or perhaps the program doesn't operate in their community. And so as a result, there are individuals all over our state that are significantly underutilizing important programs like WIC, like school breakfast, and the summer meal program.
So what was interesting to me, Colleen, is as I read through a report, the depository issue, you shared that information that was talking about, the uptake of that type of assistance, the federal programs and such. And so it showed where there was a pretty good increase and that we were making some improvements. With the pandemic, obviously there's concerns. I think we saw schools working really hard to make sure that kids were fed. I mean, it was one of the very first things that was on their list to do when we had everybody staying at home, was to do that. And I think when we were in 2020 and we knew who kids were and where they were generally, though we were tending to lose a few, we felt like we could get those resources to them. But post the pandemic, we've seen fewer students in schools now. We have concerns about where they are, and there's no doubt that we're concerned about some of those kids getting resources. But even when you look at a per capita rate of the uptake of use of these types of resources, the free and reduced lunch program, whatever that might be, we're seeing a reduction in that overall. So why do you think that is? I mean, I can't imagine that awareness is still an issue. So you guys started to speculate and maybe how we work to address some of that. And not a small question, not a big question at all, Colleen. I mean, I know I'm hitting you with the whole enchilada here, but I know there are people are dealing with this, particularly now that we've seen the federal government, not support paying for all students, meals, both for breakfast and lunch. And so I know you guys are wrestling with this.
Yeah, we are. I mean, schools are not only centers of learning, they're also the central spoke in our country's effort to combat childhood food insecurity and to ensure that our kids get connected to the nutrition that they need. And the National School Lunch Program and the School Breakfast Program provide kids with nutritious meals every day. And we saw during the pandemic that there were significant changes in our school buildings, in particular around the way that they were getting connected to nutrition. And we saw that, the impact on school meal participation in Illinois is mixed. So you mentioned the Food Depository recently released a paper making the connection between declining school enrollment and enrollment in our federal nutrition programs. We see this is a nationwide trend that we're seeing decreases in enrollment. And here in Illinois, school lunch participation declined sharply, 39% relative to pre-pandemic participation. But on the flip side of that, we saw that school breakfast actually went up a little, about 9%. And that decrease in school meal participation, I mean, it equates to about 61 million fewer meals to Illinois kids. And, in terms of your question about why that might be, I mean, there's a number of factors. A lot of people, obviously, during the pandemic, there was such volatility that families might not have wanted their kids to be in the school buildings. Some families, their children might have had to enter the workforce earlier than they might have anticipated just because of the economic security. But, across the board, we had been seeing that that school meal participation really changed. And we think that increase in breakfast could be because a lot of schools were taking advantage of some of those flexibilities that was the waivers that were coming out of the federal government and being able to package breakfast and lunch together in a grab and go model. So allowing families to get breakfast and lunch and take it home. And so we think that had an impact on our breakfast numbers.
That's interesting. So, Colleen, obviously, you are extremely interested in what's happening with schools. School leaders, obviously want to make sure that their kids' nutritional needs are being met, because there's no doubt then that has an impact, number one, on their overall well-being, but also their performance and ability to do well in school. If you're to give advice to school leaders when it comes to working to make sure that kids have access to food, that we can help reduce food insecurity, and I'll even toss in there, I'm interested in your thoughts about outside of school. When you reference kids taking meals home, we know we have schools that are providing meals for kids on Friday afternoon for them to grab, even inconspicuously, so they're not embarrassed by that, but are able to take it home so that they've got something to eat over the weekend. What type of advice would you give to school leaders as they're working to, make sure that kids have what they need, in particular, as we now deal with the fact that the federal government has ended paying for, all students' breakfast and lunch at this point in time?
Yeah, I mean, I would encourage policymakers and schools, like you mentioned, people who care about the health and well-being of our kids, to advocate to continue the unprecedented flexibility and innovation that we saw schools demonstrate during the pandemic, by helping them to leverage existing federal policies that make school meals as accessible as possible to families. I would include in that the community eligibility provision and breakfast after the bell. At the federal level, Congress should expand federal policies like CEP that make it easier for families to enroll in school meal programs. And I mentioned breakfast after the bell. I mean, that's really a program that enables schools to serve kids in more accessible and equitable ways. So, you kind of alluded to that stigma issue. Grab and go breakfasts allow kids to pick up prepared meals on their way to class. And breakfast in the classroom models allow kids to eat meals in the classroom before the school day has even begun. And each model fits different school environments and student ages, and gives schools the opportunity to choose the model that works best for them and their kids. And overall, by remaining flexible and delivering breakfast in different ways, it can make it more accessible for kids and frankly increase participation.
Yeah, what I loved about paying for all students, I mean, that just totally removed the stigma, right? I mean, that just took that totally off the table, and so it wasn't an issue, and we could definitely make sure that kids, get what they need. Colleen, what types of efforts are you coordinating with regards to the various agencies, here at the state level, federal level? Who are you working with on this important issue?
That's a great question. So I would call out one program in particular that we worked on very hard together with the Department of Human Services, and that was pandemic EBT. The Department of Human Services really just kind of jumped right in and did an incredible amount of work to get more than 1 million Illinois school children pandemic EBT benefits, essentially, replacing the value of the school meal that they would have had if the school buildings were open, and giving them a grocery card to be able to go and provide money on that card for them to be able to purchase meals at a grocery store just like everybody else. So that was a hugely impactful program. And then in relation to the Illinois Commission on Hunger, I mean, the whole purpose of that body is to bring the public and the private sectors together to really make sure that we can have a collective impact. I would use as an example the SNAP Online program. One program flexibility that we got during the pandemic was to allow SNAP households to use their SNAP cards to purchase groceries online. Obviously, you can imagine that was hugely impactful at a time when people were afraid to go to the grocery store. And, we brought together the private sector to help us really get the word out about that really important program.
Yeah. And I think it's important to emphasize, though you work with the depository up in Chicago, I mean, you referenced to me or share with me, you've also got an office with DHS, and we wanted to make sure that we're clear. The commission is statewide, right? I mean, it's not meant to just take care of the northeast part of the state. It is really important that people understand that the resources that you're speaking to take care of us, from Cairo to Chicago, from Danville over to Quincy, and everywhere in between.
That's right. The Illinois Commission on Hunger does work statewide, really talking and listening to communities all over state about how hunger impacts their communities. What someone in Cook County experiences in terms of food insecurity may be vastly different than what somebody down in, let's say, Schuyler County experiences in terms of food insecurity. And so really making sure that we're listening to our communities about how hunger impacts them is so critical to the success of this work.
So where can they learn more, Colleen, about your work and then also to get access to these important resources that you talked about?
Well, the commission operates its own website. You can go to endhungerillinois.org and learn more about the Commission to End Hunger and our work, including the report that I mentioned, From Food Insecurity to Food Equity. That's on the website. Please feel free to take a look. There's contact information there too. So if you'd like to sign up to learn more about what we've got on the commission, you are more than welcome to do that. That's all on our website as well.
Excellent. We'll include some of that in the show notes as well, just so people can get quick access to those things too. So, Colleen Burns, thanks for joining me to talk about this important topic about the Commission to End Hunger and the work that you're doing statewide across the state of Illinois. And you're part of one of what I call a unique club that you started your job basically right around the start of the pandemic, right? So I talk about school leaders that did that. I'm like, you're in a special like fraternities / sorority of people that did that. So kudos to you for pulling that off. That's not an easy task.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me.
That's a pleasure. Again, my name is Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the Illinois Principals Association. Thanks for joining me for this IPA talk. As always, if there's anything the IPA can do for you, give us a call or check us out on the web at www.ilprincipals.org. Take care.